Mirror Mirror by Jeff Williams is the first track used as the theme for the character of Weiss Schnee in the 2013 White trailer. However, its leitmotif recurs in many other songs throughout the show, particularly scenes focused on Weiss or her family. I recommend referring to this video by Edelweiss for more specific examples, because it explains some fascinating soundtrack aspects one might overlook at first glance. Similar to This Will Be the Day, this video will be divided into three parts. First, a musical analysis, followed by an examination of the song's lyrics, and finally, some observations on its usage in the White trailer. So, let's get started. Six bars of solo piano introduce the first 8-bar verse. Now, 6 bars is quite an unusual length for musical phrases, a detail worth keeping in mind for later. After 2 bars, where the strings build up in A minor, the second 16-bar verse follows, along with a 12-bar instrumental passage where the piano showcases virtuosity by playing rapid scales in D harmonic minor. Following these are spine-tingling vocalizations and a second 8-bar instrumental section. In the third and fourth verses, each also spanning 8 bars, the main melody is accompanied by a counterpoint a third apart, releasing the energy accumulated in the previous sections. The song concludes with the final verse fading into the last arpeggio, gradually giving way to silence. Like many others, the song is in 4/4 time, but Williams plays extensively with the tempo and rhythm in this piece. I'll discuss rhythm choices later, but in terms of tempo, it varies from 70 BPM in the introduction to 146 BPM for most of the song's duration, returning to around 60 BPM towards the end. These tempo changes alone indicate that, despite being repetitive in terms of melodies and lyrics, the song is anything but linear and stable. The sense of instability is highlighted by the many abrupt changes in key signatures. The piece begins in A minor, then moves to D minor, then E minor, then back to D minor, before concluding with a Picardy cadence on an arpeggiated D major chord. What's interesting is the use of these specific key signatures. Of course, D minor and E minor are somewhat expected modulations for a section in A minor. After all, the entire melody in this key follows a pattern of progressions using those 3 chords, but in order to understand the song's tone, it's essential to have some context regarding the use of these specific key signatures. Famous examples of A minor compositions, such as Beethoven's Fürelise, Chopin's B-150 Waltz, and Grieg's Piano Concerto, display many shades of melancholy and introspection. In D minor, a decidedly more tragic key, we have Bach's Toccata and Fugue, Rachmaninoff's Third Piano Concerto, and Handel's Saraband, while in E minor we find Dvorak's cathartic Symphony No. 9, From the New World. Regarding the instruments, Williams accompanies the vocal part using piano, strings, and percussion, creating a very gloomy and refined atmosphere that mirrors the song's lyrics and Weiss's backstory. Speaking of Weiss, it's time to move on to the lyrics. For a song with so few verses and so many repetitions, Mirror Mirror tells us a lot about the protagonist's personality and offers so many possible interpretations that it's difficult to pinpoint what messages it wants to convey correctly. Before delving into the meaning of the verses, I want to make one last observation from a rhythmic perspective, specifically regarding the relationship between the sung words and the structure of musical phrases. In the first verse, Williams distributes the words evenly within the bars, with only loneliest spanning 2 different bars. The same goes for the second verse, where loneliest and inside are the only words not entirely within a single bar. However, as the tempo accelerates, the words in the last line create a sense of great tension, which culminates in the third verse, the song's apex. At this point, the singing is decidedly more frantic than before. The last two lines are sung almost entirely following syncopation, a sign that Weiss, the song's protagonist, is losing control over her emotions, the very control she has struggled so hard to maintain. Finally, in the fourth verse, consisting of only two lines, the lyric's speed is halved compared to the instruments, giving it a solemn and declarative tone. Who's the loneliest of all is the question Weiss has now asked 3 times, and she's on the brink of an answer, the conclusion she was so afraid to draw. The fact that the lyrics become so detached from the rhythm, an aspect that is not present to this extent in songs from the other 3 trailers, and the abundance of questions that Weiss poses reveal the protagonist's state of mind. She finds herself in a situation where she has come to doubt everything, is insecure about everything, and is in a highly emotionally unstable state. To understand what has caused this explosive situation, we can finally turn to the meaning of the lyrics. First and foremost, let's address the most apparent aspect of the lyrics, the parallels between Weiss and the character of Snow White. For those who may not know, Weiss Schnee means white snow in German. Although Snow White's German name is Schneewittchen, the song does reference one aspect of the original Grimm brothers fairy tale, the magic mirror. However, the situation in the song is reversed compared to the fairy tale. While the fairy tale's mirror is a separate entity from the person who gazes into it and can, therefore, independently answer the inquirer's questions, the mirror Weiss addresses is, in fact, a metaphor for herself. The fact that she poses such deep and personal questions to herself reveals a fundamental issue. Weiss is living through an identity crisis. Okay, this might seem like a conclusion pulled out of thin air, but bear with me for a moment. Let's start from the beginning. Mirror, mirror, tell me something. Tell me who's the loneliest of all. Besides using word for word the formula the Queen uses to address the magic mirror in the Grimm brothers fairy tale, these 2 lines shed light on Weiss's self-perception. Just as the Queen asks the mirror who is the fairest of them all, expecting the mirror to respond that she is the fairest, Weiss questions who is the loneliest person in the world, knowing deep in her heart or strongly suspecting that it's her. Then Casey Lee Williams sings, "Fear of what's inside me. Tell me, can a heart be turned to stone?" which is one of the most metal lines I've heard Weiss say, and "Save me from the things I see." Here, it's explained how Weiss has arrived at this situation. The emotional traumas she has endured, probably caused mainly by her father's manipulative behavior and her mother's neglect, have led her to build a facade, a protective shell around herself. It has led her to adopt a cold, cruel and arrogant demeanor, to keep people at bay and shield herself from further pain. Mirror, mirror, what's behind you? I can keep it from the world, why won't you let me hide it from me? Remember that Weiss is asking these questions to herself. The mask she has worn for protection has become so attached to her face that she can no longer recognize who Weiss Schnee truly is. What is the personality she is desperately trying to suppress? Is it the one of the girl who yearns for a real life filled with emotions and relationships with people who understand her? Or the impeccable ice sculpture her father has shaped her into over the years? Not even Weiss knows anymore, having reached a point where she doesn't know who she wants to be, should be, or even who she is. The song concludes with the answer to the pivotal question: who's the loneliest of all? I am the loneliest of all. Weiss finally manages to put what she has suspected throughout the song into words. The wall of loneliness she has built around herself as protection has denied her the possibility of developing positive relationships, and condemned her to bear the weight of her doubts in complete solitude, hiding herself from the world's gaze. In conclusion, let's discuss the actual trailer. The video opens with a phrase coined by Monty Owen: "Everyone is entitled to their own sorrow, for the heart has no metrics or form of measure, and all of it irreplaceable." Let's break it down. I believe the first sentence holds when considering the situations the four members of RWBY find themselves in at the beginning of the show. RWBY has lost her mother, something I look forward to covering in the analysis of Red Like Roses, because that song is beyond incredible. Weiss has endured a childhood that no one should experience. Adam has manipulated Blake during her time in the White Fang, and Yang is deeply affected by the fact that Raven abandoned her and Taeyang right after she was born. These reasons for sorrow align well with one of the most cathartic moments in the show, the speech "I am a huntress" from Volume 9, Chapter 4, where Yang says, "My losses, my failures, those more than anything are what have shaped me into who I am, and showed me how I need to grow." The message of this third sentence is now clear. Everyone has the right to suffer their own way, and no one has the right to judge another for why or how they suffer. On the other hand, the second sentence directly references the superiority of the heart and soul over the mind and cold rationality, a theme in the show I've already discussed in my analysis of This Will Be the Day. In summary, applying objective measurement systems to feelings or suffering is futile, because each person lives and feels differently, as feelings, especially suffering, are highly subjective. The concluding phrase is the most cryptic to me. What does it mean that suffering or the heart is irreplaceable? And why does the last word come after the ellipsis? Does it mean that the one who wrote it struggled to translate what they felt into words? Is it meant to assume a musing tone? Or is irreplaceable not the conclusion they intended to draw, but the one the reasoning led them to, much like Weiss's loneliness? After much thought, I've arrived at two possible interpretations. We could translate the entire phrase as follows: everyone has a right to suffer their way because our feelings are incomparable to others. Everyone's suffering is unique, and we can't pretend to understand it fully. This general interpretation can apply to many characters and serve as a lesson for ourselves. Or, using Weiss as the narrator, we could have her say, "Everyone has a right to suffer their way because our sorrow is what ultimately defines us, and I have given up trying to replace my sorrow with other emotions." The second interpretation is much more tragic and specific to Weiss's character. Still, I believe this is why Owen used ellipses. I imagine Weiss would sound dejected while uttering the last sentence. Please let me know what you think of this quote in the comments, because I'm not 100% sure I've interpreted it correctly. I'm very interested to hear your theories about it. Continuing with the trailer, we hear an announcer introducing Weiss on a theater stage. The presence of an audience clapping and cheering, but remaining distant, underlines that, even though physically surrounded by people, Weiss has remained emotionally alone and isolated. Her outfit immediately shows that she comes from a wealthy and upper-class family. The snowflake emblem on her jacket, representing the SDC, reminds her that, due to her father's plans, her primary objective in life must be to publicize and support her family's name. A close-up of her face reveals her scar, barely visible, indicating that this performance must take place after the duel against the Armagigas. Imagine hiding such an event while bearing the indelible mark on your face. This is an example of what I meant by Weiss forces herself to wear a mask to protect herself from others. Another intriguing detail is the three spotlights focused on the singer, symbolizing the pedestal on which the people around her place her. Finally, the scene transitions from the stage performance to the battle against the Armagigas by pointing the camera at the protagonist's reflection on the stage, indicating that her other personality, the one willing to confront her father to get a glimpse of freedom, is in action during the flashback. As expected, the sudden accelerando of the music corresponds to the beginning of the battle, and the D minor key accompanies the entire first part of the fight. Then, after being struck and wounded by her opponent, Weiss lets out a groan of pain, and for the first time since the start of the duel, her stoic expression cracks, revealing the huntress's doubts about her abilities, whether she can overcome this test imposed on her by her father. This moment of insecurity is then musically overcome with vocalizations in E minor that resolve into a hopeful F major chord, and Weiss stands up and assumes the position to continue the fight, despite bleeding from her left eye. The second part of the duel, in which Weiss demolishes her opponent blow after blow, is accompanied by the third verse, in which the protagonist expresses her uncertainty, fear, and loneliness more explicitly. My interpretation is that Weiss has realized that, compared to everything they forced her to endure in the past, the Armagigas is barely a threat to her. She is more determined than ever to fight for the assertion of her freedom and identity, whichever it may be. After defeating the opponent, a final transition takes us back to the stage, and here a significant detail is found in the remnants of the salmon and the snowflakes. Seemingly indistinguishable from each other, the formers move upward, and the latters move downward, reinforcing the game of reflections used at the beginning of the flashback. At the end of the performance, Weiss opens her eyes and appears almost disoriented. While singing, she probably couldn't help but reminisce about the duel. Finally, the flash of sadness on her face is the last sign of inner conflict that the singer lets slip, before schooling her features again into stoic expression. And with that, thank you for watching till the end. Let me know if you liked this video, because I might very well make more in the future. Please consider checking out the sources linked in the description, as other people made videos similar to this one, and you might find them quite interesting. Now, I'm finally at the end of my 4 pages long script, and still need to edit this video. So, see you next week.